All right, just because of the time so that we can enjoy as much of the lecture for as long as we can, I think we're going to get started. It's great to see our colleagues from across Western New York, from Buffalo AKG joining, from Buffalo. Hi to those from Cleveland Museum of Art, Michigan, Arizona. Please continue sharing where you're from in the chat if you like. Maine, fun. So we've got people from all over this afternoon, if you're on the Eastern time zone with us. But thank you for joining. So we're gonna get started now. Hi, my name is Emma Rathie. I'm the manager of programs and exhibition production here at the George Eastman Museum. And welcome to today's virtual lecture. We have our Curator Talk with Peter Bagrov, Senior Curator of the Moving Image Department, and Nancy Kauffman, Archivist of the Stills, Posters, and Paper Collections in the Moving Image Department. And today you're going to learn about how Crashing into the 60s, film posters from the collection was developed from concept to full exhibition. I want to extend our appreciation to the exhibition sponsors with major support for 75th anniversary exhibitions provided by the Rubens Family Foundation. This exhibition is also generously sponsored by St. John's. If you have questions during today's presentation, please use the Q&A button on your Zoom screen. This should be located at the top or the bottom, depending on what device you're using. You can use the chat function is open, and you can use that to say hello, but we will not be monitoring the chat for questions for this presentation. And we are recording today's talk. So this will be on our YouTube channel soon after it's complete, if you'd like to watch it again or share with friends. And you'll find many other virtual programs on our YouTube page, as well as other public programs that have been recorded. In regards to Crashing into the 60s, we have a couple other programs coming up in the next week. So next Thursday at 6 p.m. in our main galleries, we'll have a design tour of Crashing into the 60s with Janet Borgerson and Jonathan Schroeder. You're going to learn about film posters, design elements, and more. And additionally, next Friday, same time, same place, here online at 1 o'clock Eastern time, we're going to have a virtual conservation talk with our excellent conservation department, where they're going to discuss all the efforts that went into the conservation, preparation, and installation of this exhibit. And you can register for both of those programs on our website. But without taking any more time from Peter and Nancy, I'm going to pass it over to them. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. So just a couple of words about how this exhibition came about. This year, the Eastman Museum celebrated 75th anniversary, and we're a museum of photography and film, and of course of George Eastman's legacy as well. So we thought about how we would like to represent the moving image collection here. We're mainly known for film preservation, but we actually have a huge collection of stills, posters, and papers. And we hadn't had a film poster exhibition for more than 30 years, which was quite amazing to find out, but actually when I joined the museum 5 years ago. So we were thinking together with Nancy, what should we come up with? So, well, Nancy, would like to say a couple of words about the scope of the poster collection.
Yes, so we have quite a substantial collection of over 5,000 posters here in the museum, and it really covers from the earliest days of cinema, from the late 1890s to the present. And being in the United States, we do have a predominantly posters from the US, but we do have some really great pockets of international posters, Soviet, Polish, Cuban, French, German, and so it can be quite representative of a lot of different areas of film.
So we started talking about this 5 years ago, and the question was, what do we want to select? The first idea was, well, let's look at the next slide, please. The posters that we have already conserved. Could we move to the next slide, please?
I am trying. There it
Oh,
goes.
yeah, yeah, thanks. So we have here the previous one. We have here the Selznick School of Film Preservation, which has been around for well, about 30 years, and we have about 300 graduates. And every year we conserve one poster. And the scope is very diverse. As you see here, we have silent films, and we have Hollywood classics, and we have a French film in the middle. The left and right one are big studio posters. The middle one, with an imitation of style of Jean Cocteau, was actually designed by a cinema in New York City. So even though the scope is very wide, we only have less than 30 posters conserved as part of the Southern School curriculum. So it would be a neat little exhibition, very diverse, but too small. We wanted something big for the main gallery, something that could fit, we didn't know the scope yet, let's say 60 to 80 posters as we first thought. So then we started looking into areas of the collection where the posters are very richly represented, because our collection of film posters is impressive, but not definitive. I don't think anyone has a definitive collection of film posters. So we thought of what are the highlights, what are the areas that are well represented. Nancy, would you like to talk about the first option?
Yep, so we have a really wonderful collection of early cinema and silent cinema posters. Like I said, from as early as the 1890s through the 1910s especially, and into the 20s, although it starts to thin out about then. Once we get into the bigger Hollywood productions, those we just aren't as well represented as Peter will talk about in a minute. These are great posters and I love them dearly, but the problem is because of their age and their past handling before they came here, they are often in very poor shape. So we have conserved a number of them, but oftentimes they are in the kind of condition that you see for the one on the right, which would require extensive conservation treatment and a great expense. So in going into this idea for an exhibition, we needed to keep that in mind. How much conservation treatment could we feasibly do with our budget? So that kind of ruled these out for the number that would need really extensive treatment. Another great collection we have are these German posters from the 1930s. And we literally have hundreds of these and multiples of the same posters. So this is another area we'd love to do an exhibition on these, but like the early cinema posters, they are often in pretty rough shape and would need conservation treatment, again, at great expense. And we are still getting a handle on this collection, and we even received over 200 more of these similar posters just in the last month. So we're still processing these and trying to be able to make better decisions of which ones we want to treat first. We've done a couple of them through the Selznick student. They're on the Selznick school, they're on the left, but more typically they are all folded up and look like the one there on the right.
And I think it's now that we got this new donation, now we're actually convinced that we have to have this exhibition at a certain point, but we'll need to do some extensive fundraising for that. And what's even more exciting, we have many of these films on film prints, which are original nitrate prints from the 30s. We showed one of them, Schlussakkord, at the Nitrate Picture Show, because we have a festival where we show nitrate prints from the 30s and 40s, sometimes even from the 20s. And we have more of those. So this could be something very impressive, but it's an ambitious project. I'm pretty sure we probably have the largest collection of this Nazi-era German posters in the country, in the US. Let's move to the next slide, please. So here we have the Hollywood poster. That is what people would expect us to have a lot of, because we have many great film prints and negatives from that era. Like we have the camera negative of Meet Me in St. Louis here, along with The Wind and There Was a Divorce and many other things. This being said, the classical Hollywood of the 30s, 40s is not, even the late 20s, I would say, is not very well represented in our film poster collections. And what's more, we can probably, put together something big enough from the posters we have, but they're not, and that's a subjective thing, but I think they're not very impressive very often. If you look at the poster of Meet Me in St. Louis here, which looks like a somewhat very modest poster, this was the definitive one-sheet poster for this now legendary film. And MGM in general was, as many other studios at the time, known for pretty dull posters. As beautiful as the posters were, let's say in the early 30s and the 20s, the art somewhat declined. And you can find great ones, but not here. And I mean, this was one of the first, indicators of a rule we realized very quickly. And that is that there is no connection between the quality of the film and the quality of the poster. There are great films with very boring posters, and there are very mediocre films when the posters are absolute graphic masterpieces. And we encountered more and more of that as we were putting the exhibition together. Nancy, your turn.
Yep. So one last large collection we wanted to mention is the United Artists poster collection, which covers 1951 to 1981. And that was donated to us in 1985. And in fact, that earlier poster exhibition that Peter mentioned from 1992 actually was of these did draw from the United Artists poster collection from all 3 decades. So that was called Selling Them Big. However, it was pretty limited to just the smaller one sheet size posters, the standard size of posters. So we weren't going to repeat that, but this was definitely a collection that we looked to for other inspiration for what we wanted to do for this poster exhibition. And we ultimately arrived at doing the 1960s because they're very well represented in this collection. We did use a lot from the UA posters, and there's 62 posters in the exhibition, and 44, 45 of them are from the United Artists collection. It does have many different sizes of posters for the same film. So that was some interesting ones that we wanted to explore, including multi-sheets, the large format posters, which I'll talk about more in detail just a bit later in a few slides. So for the 60s, we figured that we wanted to focus on that across the collection because we could do international and treat all of the different kinds of social issues and changes and artistic design changes that were happening in movies and reflected in the posters. I think you're up next, Peter.
Yep. So these were the things we were looking at because on the one hand, it's very graphically diverse. No, let's first have the.
I didn't touch a thing. I'm on the scrolling of my mouse. There we go.
So on the one hand, well, we see the different types of films. We have big Hollywood blockbusters like The Great Escape, a film that people would know and relate to. We have films that represent the social changes and the countercultures, like Revolution, which is one of the first major documentaries about the hippie counterculture. And then we have the European posters, which are very well represented in the collection, like this poster for a German film, The Rest is Silence, sort of a modern day version of Hamlet, which, by the way, we're showing at the Dryden next Wednesday. We have an original print of this very interesting German film by Helmut Keutner. And also different styles. So we have the very characteristic psychedelic colors in the Revolution poster. We have posters made from film stills, and we see a bit of that in The Great Escape. There are like images from the film you can recognize. And we have the more, I would say, abstract in a way, the more stylistic and the more, graphically challenging posters, which were very characteristic of Eastern European design at the time, but also of some American posters, including posters by the great designer Saul Bass. Now let's go to the next slide. Thank you. So Saul Bass was, I think, unquestionably the superstar of film poster design in the United States and maybe even worldwide at the time. Now he definitely is. And he's somebody who tried to absorbed all of the graphic tendencies of the first half of the 20th century in American and European art, and to apply that to film posters. He tried for his first poster attempts were in the late 40s. They were not considered unsuccessful. I think they're beautiful, but I guess the industry wasn't ready for them. And then he became a star when he designed opening credits and titles for such classic films as, I don't know, Psycho, for example, or North by Northwest. I'm sure many of you remember the titles in those films. And then finally he was given a chance at the very late 50s to do whatever he wants in poster design. So I would like to quote him. He very rarely would draw something from a still. Like you see nothing of that in Advise and Consent poster in the middle, and very little. There's a bit of Burt Lancaster's face in Birdman of Alcatraz, but that's still, it's not a still from a film. It's a graphic idea. So as he said, his goal is to evoke a mood, an atmosphere, and a feeling that is appropriate to the character of the film. It must symbolize and summarize in the most succinct and memorable form what the film is essentially about. So indeed, a graphic formula of the film. You would very rarely have recognizable actors in his posters, with one big exception, the poster for Judgment at Nuremberg on the left, where we have all of the stars there. But again, it's one of the most, I would say, avant-garde approaches to portraying stars on a poster. And this, by the way, was a poster he didn't like and he disowned. It's one of the few posters that was not signed by him, because he did sign his posters, and not too many artists did that. Nancy, I think the next one is yours.
Yep. So one interesting contrast in design that we would have liked to show, but we can show you here virtually, is the design for the poster. It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. So coming from Saul Bass' slide before this one, this is a poster he designed for the film. Hugely popular film, great design by Saul Bass. We don't happen to have that in the collection. So this was an exhibition, is an exhibition drawing from our own collections. But we do have, come on. My control is not working. There it is. Sorry. We do have, kept you in anticipation there, a French poster designed by another artist, Jack Davis. And if you don't know his name, you probably definitely know his style of posters and comics. He started out as an artist at Mad Magazine and did Tales from the Crypt artwork. Very easily recognizable style. TV guide covers, if you know the 70s era, he's all over the place there, and in posters. Woody Allen's Bananas poster, Elliot Gould in The Long Goodbye. Typically big, huge heads on very tiny bodies. So this is one that we do have, and we did use in the exhibition. We would have loved to have both of them side by side to show you in the exhibition, but alas, we do not have them both. If anyone has one to donate, let us know. And then other designers, as Peter said, Saul Bass has his name on his posters. Mostly European posters will have the artist's signature on them, some kind of identification of them, easily seen on the poster. But for the most part in the United States, we don't get that easy. A lot of them seem to be done anonymously. So it was a lot of fun for me, especially to do the research and trying to find out who the artists were on a lot of these posters that are not signed on the face of the document itself, on the poster itself. So this one example I really like for On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Turned out to be done by two artists, Robert E. McGinnis and Frank McCarthy. So they were a team who collaborated on several James Bond posters. And then another tidbit I found when I was doing research is there's another design element to this poster. And it's that 007 logo with the gun. That's right there. near the title. So that was actually designed by another artist entirely, and his name was Joseph Karoff. There's actually a great documentary about him online if you'd care to do a little research yourself, learn more about him. But he also did the poster for the Beatles, A Hard Day's Night. So his stuff is out there. He's did a lot. One of the things I saw online was the best designer you've never heard of. So I would agree that that's correct. So there's great resources online. I really enjoyed digging into the oral histories and documentaries and just people's blogs, uncovering who these artists were and matching up posters with their names and putting their names in the cataloging record gives me great satisfaction to be able to identify them. Robert McGinnis, I'll say, also did the posters for Breakfast at Tiffany's, which I'm sure you've all seen, and Barbarella. And Frank McCarthy did the poster for The Great Escape, which Peter just had up on the screen earlier. And Joseph Karoff just turned 103 years old last week. So he's still alive and with us. Next is Peter's slide.
Yeah, so thank you. The French posters were actually, as many European posters, they were assigned because artists, well, designers were treated as artists there. There were artists here as well, but I had a different reputation, if you will, unfortunately, for quite a while. So this French poster of a film by Jean-Luc Godard, the great French director, The Carabiniers, has a very interesting, I think, sort of fun hidden there. It's very colorful, and yet it's a grim black and white film. The poster is deliberately deceitful, and I'm pretty sure that Godard had something to do with this. So it's a story about two young men who want to go and fight in the army and invade a country, some country. This was, the mid-60s when Europe was involved in many wars, well, and the United States as well. They're thinking of a glamorous life. And their wives and girlfriends are waiting for all of the goods that they would ship to them. But instead, all they receive is postcards with beautiful locations that they've been to and that they destroyed. And at the end, they get unglamorously and grimly shot. We don't even see that scene. Somewhere in the background, we only hear the shots. So they dream of this. The Carabiniers, that was during the Napoleonic Wars, those glamorous horsemen with carabines or rifles. And currently, the current military men are just assassins, killers. That was the idea behind the film. So the poster designed by Jean Barnou, who was an older designer, and he started his career in the early 30s. Let's look at one of his earlier posters, a typical one. So he was actually famous for doing this the postcard and the postcard style film posters as well. Very glamorous, very appealing, and a little bit in the style of maybe like early 1930s Hollywood. And the idea was that he would have this deceitful poster. Now, the big question is whether he was in on the joke or not. That what he drew actually was misleading the audience because he really didn't change his style. They deliberately wanted somebody whose style didn't change since the golden days of, well, both French cinema and Hollywood. So that's just one example of a sophisticated design, whether it's Barnou's or Godard's idea. And then let's move to the next one, please. This is one of the Polish posters. So Poland had one of the great schools of graphic design, not only in posters, but in books and in record covers, LP covers, film posters as well. And a little bit just like Saul Bass, the idea was to have the formula of the film, the idea of the film, not necessarily a recognizable face. And indeed, actually, Saul Bass was influenced by, not specifically Poland, by Eastern Europe, among many other things, and then in turn influenced them. So this is a poster for actually a Polish poster for a Swedish film by Ingmar Bergman called The Brink of Life. And the designer, Liliana Bajewska, who started her career in Poland, was very prominent there in the 50s and 60s, and then immigrated to Canada and died there several years ago. Now, what I wanted to highlight, this is the only female designer we have in the exhibition. And I don't even think we encounter any, because we did, of course, select. We'll talk a bit about that based on the representation and quality of the posters. But I think this was the only poster that we knew was designed by a woman, and it happens to be a beautiful poster. Now, there probably were female designers in the United States at the time in film poster design, but they never had their name signed, and they remained in the shadow, as did many men, but it referred much more to women. Whereas in Europe, they were represented much more prominently, and they were indeed famous designers in Poland, in the Soviet Union, and in several other countries. So it's another interesting sort of social take, because we try to, as Nancy said, research as much as possible the lives of these artists. Yeah, next one is yours, Nancy.
So in addition to trying to identify and highlight certain poster artists, we then looked for themes occurring in our selection, the depiction of social issues such as race relations, fashion trends like bikinis, and pop stars such as Elvis and the Beatles, and try to build our selection around these kind of thematic sections in the exhibition. So some serious themes and some lighter ones to break that up. And we'll get into some of this more in just a second.
So this canonical poster, which by the way is not from United Artists, because the bulk of our American posters are from United Artists, is from My Fair Lady. Now, it's a strange poster, come to think of it, because pink is not a characteristic color for this film. Nevertheless, this became an absolutely canonical image, and you can see that it is reproduced all the time, was and is, on covers of LPs and let's look at this, Nancy, please, and VHS tapes and DVDs and online. So this image became associated with the film. This was sort of, a bingo. Whereas, let's look at another poster for one of the great films of the 60s, The Apartment. The film was immediately proclaimed one of the true masterpieces of cinema, which I think it is. And this was the main idea for the poster design. Nevertheless, if you look at the different products which was released for this film, you never or almost never see this image. You would see either still from a film or you would see a foreign poster. This one probably was considered not too appealing. And we indeed wanted to represent some of those as well. Those posters that sort of didn't have a very long life, even though the film did. Nancy, it's yours now.
And we really wanted to, I in particular wanted to illustrate the many different sizes that were made for a single film. It was routine for several decades in the United States, at least, for studios to create at least 6 standard sizes for a film. And these sizes are all based on the 1-sheet poster, the standard 1-sheet poster, the third from the left there. So then that half sheet is roughly half that size. Then a 3-sheet is basically the size of 3 of them. 6-sheet is the size of 6, etc. And the biggest one not shown here yet is the 24-sheet, also called the billboard size, and that is indeed the size of 24 1-sheets. And it measures 9 feet tall and 20 feet wide. So before I get to that one, I just want to say in our selection process, some poster artists used these different sizes, these different spaces for their designs really well, and others not so much. So when we were trying to decide which poster to use for a film, when we had these multiple sizes, how that space was used, the design in relation to the dimensions of the paper was a very big factor in which one we decided on. Saul Bass, of course, as you could see, did a great job adapting his designs to the proportions of the paper, whether landscape or portrait orientation, or tall and narrow, or square like the 6-sheet. So luckily we happen to have for 1, 2, 3, all the sizes that were created for the posters for that film, and by one of the best artists. So how could we not try to show them all? I indeed wanted to show all 6 of them, but there simply was not enough room to include them. We didn't use the half sheet and the 3 sheet, but we did use 4 of the other ones. A big strength of the exhibition, I think, is that we used a lot of these multi-sheets in the exhibition. I meant to look up how many we did, but it's probably 30% or so are large format multi-sheets. So these are the 3, 6, 24 sheet posters that I just mentioned, and they're called multi-sheets because they're in multiple pieces. So that 3 sheet is in 2 pieces, the 6 sheet is in 4 pieces, etc. So that's just how they were constructed, how they were physically dealt with. The exhibition in 1992 was called Selling Them Big. So we kind of jokingly dubbed ours Selling Them Bigger, because we used the big posters, and that earlier exhibition was pretty limited to the smaller 1 sheet sizes. And they were multi-sheets, very challenging for us to conceptualize how to get them on the walls. And you'll hear much more about that next week. I will leave it to our conservators and object preparators to tell you all about that. And I hope you'll tune in to hear them talk about that. Now for the 24 sheet, the big one of them all, we knew we wanted to include 1 in the exhibition, and we knew it would take up an entire wall. So that's valuable real estate. So it had to be a really good one. So we actually have 47 24 sheets in the United Artists collection, and 31 of them are from the 60s. So we had quite a few to choose from. We did consider Goldfinger early on. It's a very iconic poster and imagery. It would go over well with the audience, but it is quite literal in how it is using that imagery. That shot of Sean Connery doesn't do it for me. Then we also were considering A Hard Day's Night with the Beatles, again, very iconic, but it just didn't quite do it for the space we wanted to put it in. It would also be against a light colored wall, so it just didn't stand out like we wanted this to. Even if we had painted the wall behind it, it takes up so much of the wall as an accent wall, it wouldn't really have done what we wanted it to. So we did ultimately decide on 1, 2, 3 for many reasons. It checked many boxes for us. For one thing, that color is, that orange red is just so eye-catching. It just smacks you in the face. You can't ignore that. So we also liked that it went well with our theme of trying to show all posters that we could for one title, and how Saul Bass used that space for his different designs, his basically 2 different designs, and how he adapted them for 4 out of the 6 posters in our collection.
I would add one thing about the 24 sheets. Now, they are particularly rare to find because smaller posters, especially the 1 sheet, the half sheet, maybe the 3 sheet, you can take them, off the wall and hang them in your room, your dormitory, if you were like a young, student film buff, which people did, and they survived. These were glued to a billboard, and they were either torn off or something was glued on top of them. So the only way of having them in the museum if they were never used. That's why it's difficult to have them, and the one that we do have were pristine, and having all, I think it's 12 pieces in intact was quite a challenge. So this was one of the main challenges we had. We absolutely had to have a 24 sheet, and I think indeed it works.
Yep, I think it's a good choice. Next, another point we wanted to show. I'm sorry, did you say something?
Nope.
Another point we wanted to show, Peter mentioned a little bit earlier, is how artists typically used still photographs as references for creating the designs of their posters. That was pretty routine practice for several decades in the Hollywood studio system. And it was often a very literal interpretation of a still, putting it directly into the poster. This one is not too bad. I really liked this poster a lot, in that the artist, Paul Crepo, likely used the two stills to the right as inspiration for his poster. I really like how he picked up on the circles of light in that top still and put those into his design in the background. And again, the color really grabs your attention. It's not quite that same red as that other. It's a little up toward the pink when you see it in person. But this was very routine. They could sometimes be very badly done, where one head is taken from one still and put on the body of another. Same person from a different still, just kind of like puzzle pieces, moving them around. But sometimes it did work really well. I think this one shows one of the better ones.
So one other challenge we had, or idea we had, was to compare different posters for the same film, like something that Nancy discussed talked about when she talked about It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, but we didn't have, we only had one poster there. So this one is for a French film by Claude Lelouch called Life, Love, Death, La Vie, l'Amour, l'Amour. Let's look at the next one. Next slide, please. So the one in the middle, which has this sort of abstract pattern. Now, if you look closely, this pattern slightly resembles a guillotine. And the thing was that this, graphic, cruel method of execution was still very much a reality in France in the 1960s. And discussions about capital punishment were hot and topical. And the film indeed deals with this. It has one of the most depressing and grim portrayals of all of the procedures precede the execution. So even the slightest hint of a guillotine would immediately cause a spark and people would know what it's about. There was a slightly more revealing image when you see the one on the right, where the letters resemble the guillotine blade. It's also a French poster, which we do not have. We only have the left and the right one. But for the American audience, this was fortunately something from ancient history. So when the film was released in the United States, the guillotine had to be portrayed very literally, as you see in the image on the left, because the other two probably would not resonate with the American audience. This is one way of adapting film to a foreign audience. Let's look at the next one, please. Another case, an American film that was released in the US and in France. So The Miracle Worker. So as you see, and I was very fond of this image. It's basically a defect that was turned into an effect. Have this blurry photograph in motion. A terrifying and beautiful motion picture. It is, for those who don't know, a story of Helen Keller and her teacher. So indeed, it's a tender film, but with lots of cruelty. But the French poster on the right, and the film was called Under a Different Sun, looks like a horror film, which it by no means is. It has elements of everything but a horror film. So we wanted to compare this. And again, what is interesting, in this big 6-sheet poster, the one in the middle, you do not see the names of the stars, which was very rare for, especially for American poster. And I mean, Anne Bancroft was already a big name by that time, and she did win an Oscar for this film. And this was one of our ideas, is to have like a main poster that greets the audience when they enter the exhibition space. But then we decided that it may be a little bit too scary, especially for the kids. So we stepped away from that. Nancy, you're next.
Yep. So our selection of the 1960s as a decade, we did choose to include a few posters from the late 50s and from 1970, because the social, artistic, and aesthetic changes of the 60s that we were focusing on, of course, didn't suddenly happen on January 1st. Moving forward, things were developing before that time. In the 50s, it was very rare and certainly important to see a Black man's face prominently displayed on a poster. And in this case, Harry Belafonte, even bigger than the previously leading man, Robert Ryan, and even billed higher than Robert Ryan. So we wanted to include things like that. For 1970, which was our cutoff point, we were able to include this early blaxploitation poster, which was really a predecessor for what became such a large movement in cinema in the 1970s. So we wanted to give a little look forward as well, what's coming out of the 60s. And Saul Bass's poster for Bonjour Tristesse is one of his most well-known ones, and clearly illustrates how forward-thinking his designs were before the 60s hit. So we couldn't not include that one. Peter.
This being said, the 60s, life and cinema evolved during the decade. So this is a poster from 1961 and a poster from 1970. So for those who do not know what the Children's Hour is about, either the film or the wonderful play by Lillian Hellman, it is almost impossible to guess, maybe even completely impossible, that the film is about lesbians. The topic was tabooed, of course, in the 30s when the play was written, and William Wyler had to completely change the story for his first adaptation called These Three. When he remade, did a new adaptation in 1961, the same director, with Audrey Hepburn and Shirley MacLaine, it was a very accurate adaptation of the play. Nevertheless, you can show that on screen, but not on a poster. So the word different is the only hint that there is something unconventional about the topic of the film. Similarly, by the way, when Nancy was talking about Black actors on posters, Sidney Poitier became a star in the early 50s. Nevertheless, you wouldn't never see his face prominently featured on a poster in the 50s until the very very end of the decade. So that's 61 on the left. On the right, the Christine Jorgensen story about the very famous transgender woman who was a pioneer of advocate for transgender people. It's, I would even say, exploiting the topic. It's very blunt here, very obvious. So indeed, times changed. Now, for the last couple of minutes of our presentation, let's talk a little bit about the layout, because that was a challenge here. We had a big exhibition space, but of course, the only way to work on it, we have a model, and with little minis, as we call them, which were properly scaled, and we were putting them around and moving them and making sure that there is some kind of a narrative in the exhibition. And it's not only that we have a wall dedicated to Saul Bass, a wall dedicated to social changes and so forth, but also how do they speak to each other graphically? How are they visible? So we had those movable walls you see in the image on the right, and we moved them around, at first the model, then the actual walls, to make sure that the posters are visible from as far as possible, because you're not supposed to come close. It's interesting, but they're supposed to catch your eye from afar. So this was actually one of the most challenging and the most fun parts, to make sure that they all work properly, that they all work as film posters, because in reality, you're not supposed to see 60 at the same time. Nancy, next one is yours.
Yes. So some quick stats, some numbers. We have over 800 posters for 60s, by far the largest number for any decade in the collection. So we pretty much looked at all of them physically on a table, and multiple sizes for over 300 different films. Then from our initial review, we reduced that number down to about 300. That was our first cut, and that got it down to about 120 different films. At that point, we started to look at those artists, what artists we wanted to represent, and what themes were really standing out among the rest, and continued to cut. Eventually, we seriously selected about 70 to 72 posters. Then came the final selection of 62 posters representing 55 films, because there's simply not room for everything, and we had to really cut some of those down so that we could give them the space they need for really viewing and appreciating on the walls. Some that were cut, I've just showed a few here that were cut from that smaller selection, that from 72 posters. The Caretakers was one of my favorites that I really wanted to include. I just really like that design, but it is a 6 sheet, and we already had 8 other 6 sheets selected that we were pretty married to. So this one got cut, unfortunately. Then the one in the center we had for, you know, bikinis, beach party movies type swinging 60 theme. But it just really it wasn't strong enough for the rest of what it was up against. So that one didn't make the cut. And similarly with How I Won the War, it had some interesting design elements to it, but it just really wasn't strong enough. And it actually didn't fit into any theme very well. So that one we cut as well. And then size and color and the use of the wall space came into oh, sorry, Peter, this is yours.
Well, we can both talk about this.
Yeah.
We're almost out of time anyway, but one thing that we discovered, for example, this was one of the posters we were offered for purchase, and it's for Hitchcock's Suspicion, which was re-released in Germany almost 25 years after its original release. And by that time, John Fontaine was pretty forgotten in Germany. Cary Grant was sort of a star, but the real big star of the film was Hitchcock, especially because of the, you know, of the TV show. So his face is prominent here in the 1960s poster of a 1940s film in Germany. And then we realized we have directors and posters finally that didn't exist before. So we had Billy Wilder on one of the, two of the 1, 2, 3 posters. So that was one of the reasons why we wanted them to speak to each other. So we put the poster for Suspicion next to it. So things like this also work. Not only a combination of purple or contrast of purple with white and with red, but also how they relate thematically. Next one is yours, Nancy.
Okay. So
Next.
yes, the size and the color and the use of the wall space was, you know, one of those final considerations of how we placed the posters next to each other. The large posters had to be on the perimeter walls. They couldn't be on those movable walls that you saw in the centers of the room. So we were, I don't want to say limited, but we just had to think in those terms. Also posters that had a white background, we didn't want to put a whole bunch of those together. So we tried to place them in between posters with more vibrant colors. And we were able to frame only certain sizes of posters. The large ones were it would be prohibitively expensive to get the materials to frame the really big posters. And I'm sure our conservators and object preparators will talk more about the framing aspect of the exhibition next week. Another plug for that. And just one more image from the gallery. Another example, this Zazie dans le Metro is a very small poster. So it really needed a wall of its own for it to stand out. It would have been completely dwarfed next to the likes of The Miracle Worker, one of the other big posters. And then that's it.
Yeah, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, we will be delighted to answer or try to answer them.
Peter, Nancy, thank you so much. That was so wonderful. If any questions are going to come through the Q&A, please send those in now. We have a few minutes. I'm going to drop a link to the exhibition webpage in the chat. Oh, I don't think I gave that to everybody. Give me 1 second.
There's a question here. Was it common for Hitchcock to include cameos of himself in film posters, like he had cameos in his films? Well, first of all, he didn't really design the posters, especially the foreign ones. Not to my knowledge. I mean, after the TV show, he became a big name, so the producers would, but not a cameo. Usually it was a big image of Hitchcock. And Nancy, maybe you know more about that.
The earliest instance I could find of him on a poster was on Psycho for one of those teaser posters. Don't tell anybody what you just saw. But I didn't do an extensive search of earlier posters. I'm sure probably re-release posters would start having him on there at a certain point for some of his earlier films, but I didn't look into that much.
Do you have a favorite or top 3 posters in the exhibition? Oh, that's difficult. Well, Nancy, do you have yours? I'll think about mine.
I got attached to a lot of these. Definitely I liked in the heat of the night very much. And my eyes are going around the room and the apartment really jumped out. I mean, as soon as we saw the apartment, just because it's a favorite film of mine, of course, many people, that one I really loved, and just there was no way we could not include that one in my mind. Yours, Peter?
Well, actually, exactly because I love the apartment so much, I didn't like the poster. But again, I was sure that we had it there. Well, Playtime, the last one we showed, was one of the ones I always loved. It's a famous poster. Saul Bass, I was always a huge fan of his, and actually, again, 1, 2, 3 was one of the reasons why I thought about this exhibition on my end. There were beautiful Cuban posters. In the very first slide, we had an image from a poster of a film called Per Primera Vez, for the first view, with Chaplin in grass. And by the way, the exhibition will end in what is it, a couple of weeks. But sorry?
September 8th.
September 8th, yeah. But then for several more months in the Port of Paris style, we will have how many posters left, Nancy?
7.
And some of the ones we love the most would stay for several more months, including that Cuban poster.
Yep.
There is another question. Were the 24-sheet posters used on billboards? Where were they displayed? Mainly on billboards. Yeah. Where else, Nancy? I think that's basically the only thing.
Yeah, on the side of a fence or a wall, if it's big enough.
Yeah.
In Hollywood, I would expect. But just the sheer act of using them and displaying them would destroy them. You know, once it's up, it doesn't come down in one piece. So the ones that we have were basically back inventory of United Artists and have never been used or put together. So that's how we were able to include them.
And the one thing we tried to have sort of the authentic placement of the posters, but not with this one, because you were supposed to drive beneath the post and not come close to it for a 24 sheet. But that was unfortunately impossible here.
We did try to do a reproduction out where the colorama is, but the proportions weren't the right size. And again, it would have been a very expensive endeavor, but it would have been come close to the original billboard.
There's another question. So curious, because posters have changed so much from the 60s. How would you compare 21st century posters to 60s posters? Not favorably, frankly. The 60s were one of the golden eras, not the only one. The 20s were great. The 70s were excellent in some countries. I think that significantly there was some huge decline in the 21st century, not right now, maybe even 20 years ago, because now what we see in most of the posters, not all of them, of course, you see the images of the stars, basically stills from the movies, sort of patched together. And that was how the most boring posters of the 40s and 50s looked. We're returning to that again. Every now and then, something much more graphically challenging and memorable would show up, both in Hollywood and elsewhere in Europe or in Asia. But the tendency is sort of too realistic for my taste right now. I think it will change. You know, it's goes in circles. Another question. Do you collect 2020s posters? Yes, we do. We would like all of the eras of filmmaking, both in terms of films and papers and posters, to be represented. Even if they're not, again, of great artistic value, they will be of great historical value at a certain point. If this is how the posters today look, this is how the museum should preserve them.
I think the next question is about researching the designers.
That's for you, Nancy. You did a lot of that.
I start just like everybody else does. I Google the name, and take it from there, and often go to industry publications if it might apply. Probably not so much in the 60s era, but earlier maybe, and newspaper searches. So lots of mostly online searches, but there's some really great books written about posters. My problem with the books written so far that I saw were mostly the big Hollywood posters where it's all about the film and the poster for the film, but not really talking about the artist or the actual creation or design of the poster. I think it gets better when you get into the 60s and up when they're talking about the designers, because they're known more than they were back then. But books are great too.
And of course, there are studio archives. If you can want to do a really deep research on and write something yourself, like a book or a big scholarly article, that's probably would bring you somewhere. But it's surprising that there's some very canonical posters, and we still don't know who they were designed by. Another question: where do you acquire new posters from the 21st century? Well, donations. That's the main source. We have a fairly small, well, acquisition budget. Almost non-existing, but we can fundraise sometime for something, but it's mainly donations.
And one of our happy stories from this exhibition is someone came to visit the exhibition early on and triggered in her memory that she had posters in her attic from when she was in college in the 1960s. And we now have a poster of Breakfast at Tiffany's, which would have been in the show if we could have done that, and To Kill a Mockingbird. So putting things on exhibition does bring more into the museum, thankfully.
I just want to flag that we probably only have time for one more question, just since we're at 2 o'clock now. So Peter, what would you like? What question is striking you right now?
Well, we have two questions on a very similar topic about copyright restrictions for reproducing posters in books and in exhibitions. That's something actually that fortunately I didn't specifically research. It was done by our colleagues here. Is there? And I'm not an expert on this part. Nancy, can you answer part of that or not?
My understanding is we can display them and the objects in the exhibition itself, and we got permission for any publicity uses of reproduction. So any of the posters you see in advertising materials for the exhibition, we did clear the copyright on those. So we can, I mean, we're showing these in our presentation. I hope that's okay. We didn't think of that, but it's very, this is a very, yeah. We do, yeah, go ahead.
There's a big difficulty with some of the foreign posters because often the companies don't exist anymore. It's a bit tricky with some of the former, let's say, socialist countries where it was state-owned, and so so publications is a much bigger issue than exhibition in terms of copyright. If we were to publish a book, then extensive research on every single poster and its rights would have been essential.
Yes.
Okay, we do have one additional question that it's in the chat and not the Q&A box. But the question is, any thought of doing a lobby card exhibition? Did the studios or directors have any input on the designs? US posters seem to have so much more verbiage and credits, with often seems to me to interfere with the design aspect.
Nancy, lobby cards are one of your favorite parts of the collection, right?
I mean, we haven't talked about it. We certainly have enough. We have great coverage. Whoops, what did I just do? We have great coverage in the United Artists collection. So many of the posters you saw for that, we also have in lobby card form in sets of 8. So they are very different from posters intended for display in a theater. So I mean, I think they would be great. We have really great early ones too for the teens and 20s. But again, like big gaps in the classic Hollywood era. So some of those same pitfalls we would encounter with the lobby cards just the same.
And we need to think about a different design because there's nothing big there, right? So, but they were very often displayed in groups. So that's maybe how it should be displayed right now. So it could be done. There are lobby card exhibitions every now and then around the world, and especially in, you know, in the US where they were particularly popular. And I think we have enough. So that's something we really did not discuss, but probably we should. Thank you for the question.
Then we do actually have jumbo lobby cards, which are a larger format than the standard size, which are really interesting colors, use of color, as opposed to the other ones.
All right. Well, I appreciate Peter and Nancy, all of your time and effort. This was a great presentation, great to learn about the exhibition in more depth. And to those, thanks for staying on a couple minutes over so that we could answer all the questions. I did drop the exhibition link in the chat. There you can see the Matterport tour. We have folks signing on from all over. So if you can't make it to the museum before we close, you can see a virtual representation of our gallery spaces, which is amazing. And also on that webpage, you can also register for the 2 additional programs happening next week. But again, I just want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.